And now, Sir Trevor McDonald. Thank you so much for doing this silly show.
Great pleasure.
Real pleasure. You see, what fascinates me about you, Sir Trevor, is that you've been working in British television since 1973.
It's a very long time.
50 years.
Yeah.
What I want to know is, how has it changed over that time?
My impression is that everything happens much more quickly now. And you don't have as much time to make up your mind about what you say and how you're going to present what you say. And it's not easy anyway these days to get a fair idea of what's going on in some situations. You have to work very hard at discovering.
I mean, one of the things that was remarkable about you is that you always wanted to get out there and find out what was really happening on the ground. I mean, you went straight off to Northern Ireland.
I wanted to go to Northern Ireland. I must confess here, partly for personal reasons. I was employed by ITN, and I had absolutely no reason why they gave me this job. And I wanted to make sure that I was doing what everybody else was doing.
Yeah.
In other words, to put it very bluntly, I didn't want to be the token black man on ITN. I wanted to do what everybody else was doing. And as you say, it resulted in my going to Northern Ireland, which was probably one of the most extraordinary things I've ever done. I'd never heard a bomb go off before I went to Belfast. I could hardly spell Kalashnikov. I didn't know what that word meant. And here was I thrown into this situation. But I learned a lot.
What did you learn, though? When you're in a situation like that with violence all around you, what do you learn?
I began to understand what the problems were all about. And I'll just give you one example. There were always difficulties about the so-called marching season.
Yeah.
And I thought, what's the problem about marching? You could march wherever you like. That's not the point. The Protestants wanted to march down the Catholic areas. The nationalists, or the Catholics, wanted to march down the Protestant areas. There was almost a kind of aggression to the politics. There was a very strong kind of religious base to some of this. I remember once, I frequently say to my friends, I stumbled into an argument about mixed communities and mixed races and mixed areas. And I hadn't got hold of exactly what was happening. And I said, I don't understand what your problem was about mixed areas or mixed communities, you know. And I said, I have a mixed marriage, for example. And they said, is your wife Catholic? I said, no, she's white. But immediately, you see, they thought there was a religious bias to everything. That was what I took away from
I'm kind of interested, though, whether you had, whether you learned anything about human nature from that kind of thing. And also from, well, let me ask you, you interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
Yeah. Saddam Hussein was a fascinating interview in the fact that he had not done many, and I think he was the only one that he did for British TV. So I had the weight of expectation on me that I was the only one who was going to be able to see him. So I was terrified. He had a pretty awful reputation. Somebody told me, in fact, that there was one meeting at which some minister began to voice a disagreement about something with him. Saddam Hussein took the minister out, shot him, continued the meeting as though nothing had happened. And so I was terrified about doing this.
But you weren't physically frightened.
No, you had to, you know, man up and
but
not,
what was the fear? Was it just being with someone who was so ruthless?
I thought that I would say something which he would not like, and he would say, I did not like this, and it would get a little awkward. Nothing like that happened. What I learned was that it was so rare for people to see him being talked to and being asked to, being made to answer questions. There were about half a dozen of his ministers sitting around my interview, and I got a little annoyed, and I said, "What are you guys doing here? Don't you have anything else to do on an evening?" And they took me aside and they said, "You don't quite understand, do you? We never see him being asked questions which he's made to answer." And then, leading on from that, at the end of the interview, I went back to my hotel suite and discovered that there were about half a dozen people from the Ministry of Information in my hotel suite drinking my whiskey, and which didn't please me too much. And they said, "How was it?" And I went on about the interview and, what I said and how he responded and so on. And they were quite nonplussed about this until I discovered that what they were really saying to me was, what was he like? It took me a little bit to understand that. They had never met him. They had never been in the same room with the president of Iraq. So he was a dictator who kept a long way from his people. His edicts went out.
But this is why dictatorships always go wrong, because in the end, they're only told what people think they want to hear.
That's right. That's right. And
tell me about the greatest, Nelson Mandela.
I found him one of the most extraordinary people I'd ever met. I couldn't understand how someone who had spent 27 years behind bars could emerge so conspicuously unbitter about anything that had happened to him. And I had sort of very good reason to think about that even more profoundly when I met him after the first interview 5 years later, when there was the South African the Rugby World Cup, which was being held in South Africa. And I went to do an interview with him very early in the morning, one day of the matches. And he said, "Could you have the lights turned down?" And we did. And he said, "Could you turn them down a little bit more?" And we did. And he said, "Just a little tweak down again." And I said, "Mr. President, the problem is this is television and we need the lights. And if we turn them down anymore, they would not be able to see you or me when this is transmitted." And he apologized immediately. He was always extremely gracious. And he said, "No, I have had problems with my eyes and so on. I've had splinters in my eyes." And he then went on to say, "From breaking rocks on Robben Island." And I thought, looking at this presidential figure, I couldn't actually construct in my mind the scene when he'd be made to break rocks on Robben Island. But yes, that's what happened. And yet he never dwelt on any of that. I had forced it out of him with this whole story about the lights. And so what I found about him was that he had this view that he could play a part in changing the South African system. I challenged him on this because I thought, I'd been to South Africa before, and I thought they were pretty implacable about what they wanted to do with their country. And I thought it'd be very difficult for any one man, even Mandela, to change this. And he said to me, and I've always remembered this, he said, "If you're prepared to sit down and talk seriously, then everything is possible." And I said, no, but not everything is possible. Some of the peripheral things are possible, but the fundamental principles remain and they can't be changed. And he said, "No, everything is possible if you're prepared to sit down and talk seriously and to compromise." And for somebody who had been put behind bars for 27 years, coming out and talking about the ability to compromise, if I'd been in prison for 27 days, compromise would not be the first thing on my mind on coming out. And he was able to do that with that conviction. And it worked to some extent,
Yes.
He changed the face of South Africa with the cooperation of people who began to see the virtue of doing this, like the clerk.
Quite a
the
good
clerk
job.
did very well.
Yeah.
He did very well. And they both got the Nobel Prize.
Yes, that was
that.
good.
That's right.
That was good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.